You're not immune to propaganda. 4 days ago, very big video. Let's take a looky look.
Ready? Here we go.
Sub to that. Oh, I subbed him.
Propaganda is always obvious in retrospect. Today, you look at the posters, the films, the cartoons from World War II and the Cold War, and it's really clear what's going on. It's obvious. You see the emotions that are being played on. You see the symbolism.
Yeah, just like in many years, we're gonna see the propaganda of Russia, right-wing parties like the AfD. It takes a very intelligent and open-minded human being to see through propaganda when it's right in front of you in your own time. You need to be a bit clever, right? Like me, for example.
Of everything. It's propaganda, and it looks like it.
Americans don't give up. That's right. And I'm an American.
20 years after the start of the Iraq War, this is what the Bush years look like.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror.
An outlaw regime that threatens
so
the
many
peace
people
with
believe in that
weapons
shit.
of mass murder.
The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and
It was also very easy propaganda, because after 9/11, the Americans were so fucking mad, bro. They just wanted to fuck someone up.
gas and nuclear weapons. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Today, we know that Saddam Hussein never had WMDs. He wasn't responsible for the anthrax attacks, and he wasn't funding Al-Qaeda. All the justifications for the Iraq War that made it out to be a battle between good and evil, that convinced millions of Americans their army should invade another country, and that resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, were unfounded and spread, at times knowingly, by senior government officials and major news outlets.
Good to be an American, eh? People often like to use this for the Russia war, like, America did this, so why is Putin not allowed to take Ukraine? Because that's a perfect example of whataboutism, right? Just because America did this, Putin would be allowed to invade Ukraine. It's one of the dumbest fucking arguments of all times. The reason why people leave Iraq at weapons was because they had and used it before LOL. What did they use, Bakun? I have no idea. What did they do? They used gas against Iran and the Kurds. I think, though, in definitions of military equipment, gas is a biological weapon, not a weapon of mass destruction. A weapon of mass destruction is a chemical, oh, biological, blah, 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 okay. But, again, I don't know much, educate me, Bakun, I'm serious, I don't know much, but the gas attack was many, many years before the Iraq war, and when the Americans in Senate were pushing for the go on Iraq war, they used certain pictures of would-be facilities that make nuclear weapons and that they're enriching uranium, which was fake as fuck. I think that was what they used in Senate to push the Iraq war. They didn't really use the gas for that. Whatever is the answer you told the discussion, this war was very, very unjustified.
When we think of propaganda, this is what usually comes.
But they just, like Julian Assange, 100% agreed, but the reason why people easily got convinced was because the past use of weapons of mass destruction, emo. Julian Assange has talked about this. The reason why America wants very, very long wars like Iraq and Afghanistan, wars that are very, very long, is so the rich can launder all their money there.
Very attractively packaged discourse to get people to fight. But there's much more to propaganda than the flashy stuff. Propaganda can be, and actually thrives, when it's mundane.
I think you and me, especially me, I see propaganda every single day at Twitter. You open Twitter, there is so much. Twitter is such a cesspit. Let's see if we can see propaganda instantly. That's not propaganda. That's... what the fuck? Oh! Jeb gave the own... Jeb Bush. Hell yeah, I'd kill baby Hitler. What?
We should talk definitions. Encyclopedia Britannica defines propaganda as the dissemination of information, facts, arguments, rumors, half-truths, or lies to influence public opinion. If we're honest, the less sensationalist way to describe most propaganda is influential rhetoric, or maybe advertising. Something doesn't need to be a lie to be propaganda. It doesn't need to come from the government. And it doesn't need to be about war or another country being the root of all evil. If you don't like this video, for example, you can call it propaganda if you want. It technically fits that description. There's no such thing as unbiased media, and I openly admit this channel's socialist bent, so this is influential rhetoric. But most of us don't use the word propaganda.
He says his channel is a socialist bent. No wonder Wolfpoops likes this. Just found this guy. He has another video, Socialism for Beginners. We're gonna watch that.
And correctly, like the very uptight people at Britannica. we tend to think of propaganda more like Edward Bernays, the guy credited with developing modern public relations back in the 1920s. Bernays described propaganda as, quote, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses. Unlike Bernays, though, most of us think this is a bad thing. He said it was an important element in democratic society. That's because Bernays had a terrible understanding of what democracy is. Bernays saw democracy not as a society where people govern themselves, striving to diffuse power equally between all and organize fairly their interdependence, but as a society that could be managed by what he called, quote, invisible governors. He believed most
The fucking deep state. There it is. I knew it all along.
people were just too dumb or prone to violence to think for themselves, except in the narrow confines of an election between 2, max 3 or 4 pre-selected candidates.
Based in the chat. Based. Oof, oof, oof.
The rest of the time, people needed to be policed and nudged from the top down for life to remain decent. And as society started turning away from more overt and violent forms of control, he helped devise strategies that would help manage society through the more subtle means of public relations instead. Bernays wrote mostly for advertisers. He cared about molding habits to increase company profits. But soon enough, the importance of his work carried his techniques into state politics. Starting in the 1940s, for example, Bernays was hired by United Fruit Company, now Chiquita, the banana people, to run a massive PR strategy.
Chiquita is fucking American? I always thought they're from Middle America or some shit.
In the US. Working primarily, but not exclusively, through influencing the press, Bernays and United Fruit drummed up fear of a communist takeover in Guatemala, which had recently democratically elected a president with somewhat left-wing politics. If you've ever heard of United Fruit, you know how this story goes. It's the same almost everywhere in Latin America. In 1954, thanks in part to Bernays and United Fruit's efforts to demonize Jacobo Arbenz and paint him as a Soviet puppet, a CIA-backed coup overthrew the Guatemalan president and replaced him with a military dictatorship that plunged the country into civil war for decades.
Wouldn't that mean that American influence has destroyed these countries? Or at least pushed them 100 years behind, man? We just talked about this to Wolfpoops the other day on World of Warcraft, right? That a lot of fear about socialism or communist ideas, where coherently they're very good ideas, for example unions, are seen as so evil and bad nowadays and communist, because after World War II the Red Scare in America was pushed so hard, man. You know, it's like Americans, if you tell them anything about unions, they're like, ah, you commie, you're taking our freedom. America did a very good job in propaganda there, man, too. And it still helps nowadays. It helps capitalism itself, right? Because if you in any way, shape, or form want to at least reform the system of capitalism in America, you're gonna be called a communist a lot. Because for fucking 70 to 80 years, it was ingrained into people's heads that this is fucking communist and everything communist is really, really bad. Yes, and in Australia we have strong unions and some of the best minimum wages and salary protection in the world. That's something I'm becoming a bit aware of lately. I'm not so political, right? I just want to kind of play games, even though you can't really separate from it. Something I'm getting a bit aware of lately as I'm thinking about life and society is that there's a lot of communist ideas, I want to call them socialist ideas, that could totally fix the world right now. Such as unions, minimum wage, worker rights, right? Taking money away from the top 1%, blah, blah, blah. Which is ideas that should be talked about, debated on an intellectual level. But a lot of people, especially in America, they will already go like, what are you communist? What are you talking about?
Back to the present. Bernays is long dead, and neoliberalism has perfected propaganda. Influential rhetoric, if you want to be less dramatic about it. The new wave of political rhetoric that's flourished under neoliberalism isn't as often about that bad country over there or the bad ideology you need to hate. That's still around, obviously, but rather the more subtle,
Socialism never works, but this time it will, guys, I promise. What a very childish and polemic comment from you, Tim the Tank. Once again, showing you're a little bit of a clown. I just stated like 4 things that totally make sense in society. Minimum wage, unions, redistribution of wealth in a certain manner, for example, an inheritance tax. And you say, well, man, that's so stupid.
Neoliberalism.
I don't even know what neoliberalism is. Neoliberalism is a contemporary used to refer to a market-orientated reform policy, such as eliminating price controls, deregulating capitalist it's like the free hand after Adam Smith. It's like freedom for the market and stuff. And reducing, especially through privatization, austerity, state influence in the economy. Which I'm against. I think human history has shown that neoliberalism does not work. Because there's one attribute that neoliberalism doesn't see. And when I was younger, I was all about the free market and capitalism. But now I see that if you leave a market alone, you have an attribute in there called human greed. And the market will not self-regulate. The market will scam. The market will kill. The market will look for ways to make money off people. It doesn't balance the needs of a society. It's just looking as much as possible to gain profit. You cannot blame capitalism for that. That's just what capitalism is. But neoliberalism fucking doesn't work, man.
More so than previous capitalist societies, has pushed its propaganda, its jargon, and its way of thinking into almost every aspect of our lives. It has found the most effective way to become bulletproof without openly relying on violence. Neoliberalism is plenty violent, but nearly invisible control works. To protect itself, neoliberalism actually molds people in its image through a mix of both rhetoric and economic policy designed to change people's habits and beliefs in line with—
And he means kind of the West here. He's talking about us.
In other words, neoliberal propaganda creates neoliberal subjects. Neoliberal capitalism is often misunderstood. Because of people like Reagan, Thatcher, Friedman, and Hayek who made small government their whole thing, that's often how we think about neoliberalism. Our current period of capitalism, where government supposedly shrank and corporate power grew. But that's not what neoliberalism is, neither in theory nor in practice. Neoliberalism actually means more, just slightly different government. Where the welfare state capitalism that existed before acted as a safety valve for capitalists by preventing markets from doing what they do, increasing inequality, exploitation, and poverty,
He's fucking right about that, man. Someone could easily tell this guy what a socialist, but he's saying nothing wrong, man.
Liberalism is a different approach to the same problem of how do you stop capitalism from imploding when left to its own devices. Instead of having capitalist compromise, neoliberal—
A little side note. You know what I always felt in my life? If I have a euro note, like I have a $5 note, a €5 note, you know what I don't like? That there's a signature on that from Mario Draghi, or now the new Christine Lagarde. I think no human being should have their signature on money. I always felt that's weird. I know they're the head of the European Central Bank, right? Or in America, I think it's the FED boss. I don't know who signs that shit, but I think money that billions of people use shouldn't have a signature of a single human being. I always felt that was weird. You know what I mean?
Policies start from the assumption that it's the general mass of people that are the problem. Neoliberal policies demand tremendous government efforts to build and make sure that the supposedly free markets actually work. And plenty of these policies are there to change people, partly by making every possible area of life amenable to market practices and market logic. The market comes first, and everything else follows.
And that is not possible anymore. Again, I started to read this book now, The End of Capitalism, that shows the market is another attribute the market doesn't control is here we go. Here comes Green Con Tommy. Another attribute the market doesn't control, such as human greed, is nature, global warming. The market doesn't care about the resources it destroys or the planet destroyed. The market is just a market, it wants to make money. But the market, as we can see the last 100 years, is killing the environment. It's very bad for human earth. And the book I'm reading right now, which is such a good book, it's a German book though, you can't read it in English, is that the market is on, even if the human race will not fix global warming because we're too slow, which is the case right now, the market will at some point either destroy the planet or will have to get reformed to save the planet. If we want to save global warming, you don't glue yourself on the streets, you don't go demonstrate. What we need to do as a society is to reform capitalism in a way that capitalism, an unstoppable force at the moment, neoliberalism, is changed in a way that it actually is positive for global warming. And the book suggests a certain kind of planning economy, such as the UK had right before World War II. You have a free market, you have capitalism, but you're funding certain things. You're taking a capitalist who, for example, owns a factory, and you tell him, if you, or you create a system where you say, if you build a car that is positive for CO2, you will get funded, and you will get a lot of customers, and you're gonna make a lot of money. You, the capitalist, will make gains, because the capitalist always wants most money. That's how we could fix global warming in a very complex way. We need to give capitalism and the market the way, or the tools to create CO2 neutral, whatever the fuck, energy, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean, right? But the capitalists still have to make money of it. As long as capitalism makes a shit ton of money of bad stuff, it's not going to change. And you can't blame it for it. That's just how it works. People want cheap stuff. It's how it goes, man. It's very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff, man.
Or as Margaret Thatcher is reported to have said, quote, "Economics is the method, but the object is to change the soul." But that's really abstract.
Jeez.
In practice, this logic at the heart of neoliberalism translates to real policies, like increasing incarceration, tying welfare and healthcare to work, criminalizing poverty and homelessness, increasing state and corporate surveillance to better exploit and increase consumption, creating new property rights like intellectual property to marketize areas of human life that worked without them, using international sanctions, threats of war, and full-on invasions to blast open countries who don't invite in foreign capital or resist free markets.
Holy shit, this guy is fucking based, man. Who is this guy? He's like Hassan, just educated. Damn, this guy is dropping bombs, man.
Bailing out private capital when banks crash year after year.
Yeah, dude, this guy's speaking utter truth, man.
Corporations as people so they can enjoy more rights, and so on. The free market isn't something that just exists.
This guy's gonna hang himself soon if he isn't careful.
And neoliberals understood that. Their project is using state power to create and sustain their vision of what it should be, creating the free market and making it interact with more parts of our day. And I know it feels like we've strayed from propaganda right now, but all this is a very important part of understanding what propaganda actually does under neoliberalism. It's there to accompany
he was once visited by the FBI,
make them more palatable, and ultimately create a market society filled with people who think like capitalists, and therefore accept more easily the fact that more things suddenly start operating like businesses. Here's what I mean. Things that exist outside the market are either reframed in market terms or demonized. Trump ran in 2016 on the promise of running America like a business. In France, Macron ran on promising to transform the country into a startup nation, where every kid should dream of becoming a billionaire. That's an actual quote. The Iraq War, supposedly fought to spread democracy, was briefly considered a success when the country was announced as open for business. Welfare, money set aside by the government to patch the gaps when the market doesn't allocate work efficiently, becomes handouts, and its recipients are admonished as lazy or welfare queens. Every government policy, with the unique exception of the military budget, is treated to a rigorous cost-benefit analysis as if the benefits of every policy could be measured in monetary terms, and despite the ability of governments to fund whatever it wants at a keystroke. Government success is measured not by the impact of its policies, their popularity, or the efficiency with which they're carried out, but by its ability to remain within budget and keeping the economy healthy. All the economy ever means, by the way, is capitalist profits, just as a side note. Outside of the state, all political movements, like strikes, are reduced to this same cost-benefit analysis, with events like the railroad workers' strike last fall being almost exclusively discussed.
Perfectly the same in Germany. All the Germans in chat will notice we have a lot of strikes in Germany lately and they don't do anything. 3 weeks ago I was out with friends and one guy brought his brother, and his brother is a grad school teacher. And he told me they've been striking for 20 years. There's never any deals. They get nothing done. They only get a little bit of peace, so they shut their mouth. They're being treated like shit. They're giving the illusion of they having rights. Like they have a union going on, the teachers' union, but they never get anything done. The leaders of the union are friends with all the fucking government people. Nothing is working. Even if they get money, it's not even enough to get the inflation back. It's all a joke, man. Like unions were inherently a communist idea and an idea for socialism, but now unions are actually, like he says, just a fake tool to fake certain things from neoliberalism.
CNN as a $2 billion a day expense, inviting viewers to make their own judgment of whether better working conditions are really worth all the strain on the economy. And this logic extends further and further out from the neoliberal core. Education isn't about learning, it's jobs training, the means to acquire human capital so that you can better market yourself to future employers. Self-care is buying the right face mask or treating yourself to a new tech product. Rest is really important and valuable and necessary so long as you're doing it to recharge for work the next day. Every problem is promised to be solved by an app that's democratizing access to something when all democratizing means for these companies is making stuff cheaper. And this isn't just something that tech companies do. In neoliberal societies, whether it's Bush or some tech guy saying it, an association is constantly made between markets and democracy, or some other positive value like freedom. Nationalized companies are always framed as state-controlled, the implication being that that's necessarily authoritarian and juxtaposed with free markets. Freedom is what happens when BP comes into a country and takes over all the oil refineries. This stems from the fact that neoliberals have a terrible understanding of, and generally a pretty strong distaste for, democracy, and try to make it up by pretending that the market, with its huge disparities of power, is actually where democracy thrives, because people vote with their dollar. No matter that some people and corporations have billions of votes, and some people have none. Friedrich
It's like
Hayek,
the most based video I've ever seen, man. This guy is shit. I don't know what to say, man.
one of the small government neoliberal guys, by the way,
Jesus, dude.
was a terribly undemocratic thinker. His ideal government's upper legislative house would only allow men of substantial property
That
over
guy
the
is
age
not
of
gonna survive for another
45
10 years,
to
man.
vote or be elected.
If his channel gets too
political
big, he's
parties
gonna be in
would
big
allowed,
trouble.
And each member would stand for a 15-year term. These guys have no clue what democracy and freedom are. But they're not shy about co-opting these terms and the positive value.
One thing I would like to hear from him and his seemingly amazing channel is what solution does he offer? What does he think? What does he think that needs to change, and how will it
To
recently
them,
happen?
freedom means giving corporations permission to do anything they want, so long as they can generate profit. And giving consumers the freedom to buy any one of 50 different brands of toothpaste, even as their boss cuts their pay on a whim and their government festers with rich old white dudes who stay there for decades. But the march of the market and its logic extends even further. Past government policy, past political organizing, past the values of freedom and democracy even, and into our everyday life. Your hobby is now your side hustle, my little grindsetter. Two words that were actually put side by side by the neoliberal thinker Gary Becker, who argued that more powerful, wealthier men were somehow more entitled to polygamy because they won at business. The most classic example of this, though, has to be the one you hear endlessly parroted by neoliberal politicians, most notably guys like Macron and all those motivational Instagram accounts. Just become an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is the epitome of the neoliberal subject, the person who is a business. Entrepreneurs are constantly applauded by neoliberals, and the entrepreneurial life is repeatedly sold to people by politicians and intelligent businessmen/grifters with an $80 course as the way to achieve freedom.
We're stepping a bit away from the topic, though, of propaganda.
Another element of neoliberal propaganda is that you, and only you, are responsible for your freedom, which is made to be synonymous with financial success. It's propaganda, in the sense that it's a lie, because this rhetoric is repeated over and over again, even though tremendous political efforts are expended by neoliberal governments to make your ability to find success harder. Neoliberal policies encourage wages to stagnate
Most
or
base video I've ever
decrease
seen in my
real
life.
terms,
Holy shit.
to cut off the safety net.
I can't
to
say anything.
defund
I
the
can't be a
public
reactor.
resources
I'm
that
just
allow
listening.
the development of people and their skills, to force people into taking on and being submerged with debt, and to imprison and police ever greater parts of the population that live outside the specific understanding of freedom. Under neoliberalism,
I would love to hear what solutions he has. I would love to hear that. He seems like a very fucking educated human being, man. I would love to learn from him.
if you cannot survive in the market, the place that is made more cutthroat every year, you don't deserve to complain until you've spent every shred of your energy trying to start your own business or selling your labor to someone else. Once again, Macron is the best example of this logic. In 2018, a citizen looking for work in agriculture came up to the French president, explaining that he couldn't find a job despite his best efforts. All Macron found to say to him was that there were plenty of jobs around, that he himself would only have to, quote, cross the street and he'd find a job for him. The idea behind the statement being that unemployment isn't the fault of capitalist society, which just happens to benefit from unemployment on the one hand and overwork on the other. No, unemployment is the fault of the individual.
I mean, everyone in chat with real job knows that our systems are massively thriving on overwork. I think every fucking friend that I have in his late 20s to early 30s, they're all overworked, man. And it's needed, it's wanted. If you don't overwork, you're gonna lose your job.
Who must be ready to take any job, regardless of how degrading or low-paying it is, rather than be unemployed. Because if the market has produced that job opening, so neoliberal thinking goes, then that job must be worth doing. Even if the only way to convince people to do it is to threaten them
I
with
only just work
poverty
my hours.
if they
That's a good
don't.
thing nowadays, if you only work your
But
hours.
statements like Macron's "just cross the street and you'll find work" are the rhetorical part of the neoliberal strategy. The propaganda that makes it seem like unemployment is the fault of individuals not working hard enough. It's there to accompany Macron's reforms to French unemployment that actively make it harder to get unemployment benefits and, overall, just make life worse for people without work. It's in these moments that the paradoxes and contradictions at the core of neoliberalism are on full display. On the one hand, you can do anything you want, be an entrepreneur, dream of becoming a billionaire from the earliest age, and yet, on the other hand, you're a lazy bum who must be willing to accept any job, at any rate, and will do so in an environment where every means of collective support is gutted, and the thing that will actually decide if you can do what you want is the market, the place where big companies and governments set the rules for what ultimately generates profit. Do what you want, so long as it generates profit for those at the top. Everything
That's kind of what our life is, right?
else
I
is
can't
worthless.
react much. I can't say much.
If you're
This
not
video is
convinced,
just too good.
think of every centrist or conservative politician's speech about jobs for the past 50
And it's funny, here comes conspiracy theories, Tommy. Every time a human being tried to fix the system and change it, JFK, they end up with a fucking headshot, man. Every time someone tries to change this, they're fucking dead.
or so years. In those speeches, whenever they talk about unemployment, it's never the responsibility of employers and the market to cater to the desires and skills of workers. It's always your responsibility to retrain yourself and lower your standards for the jobs that they offer you. Flexibility.
If you can't say something, it means you're just listening, you're not understanding. That is so utterly retarded that I'm banning you for 24 hours.
A market that can exploit and dispose of people at will is more profitable than one that guarantees everyone a decent job with good
They're not
pay
doing
and
anything. All the
security.
laptops are empty.
It's a form
They're
of
off.
control that doesn't rely on the negative, you can't do that, but convinces people that they can do anything. And when they inevitably come up short, it's because they have the wrong mindset. Work harder, think positive, and anything is possible. Look. Every political movement has its propaganda, its rhetoric that it's getting out there to try to bring people to its cause. But what good is neoliberalism? We work harder for worse pay, and we're burning out like never before. The value we produce is captured by a few billionaires who blow it on joyrides in space and buying social media platforms so people stop bullying them. Neoliberal propaganda communicates the most shallow and meaningless
I'd love to hear solutions, though.
definitions of freedom and democracy. I'm tired of it, and I know you are too.
But I think the solution is that he is the solution. What he's doing is he's spreading awareness, he's educating people. And the more and more young people are getting educated on this topic and understand what's going on, the more they're gonna not accept the system anymore.
Remember, the goal of effective propaganda is to persuade. So let's see how these different news outlets try to get us to feel a certain way.
Take the book in
Here
your
are
inventory.
3 headlines from 3 different groups. Same story, but take a look at how subtle wording differences can completely change our gut reaction to the event. Here we have examples of right-wing coverage, nominally centrist coverage from an outlet with a
Patient safety fears as junior doctors in England begin 4-day workout. Sky News says junior doctors strike patients' care on a knife's edge. Oh, that is... Man, the media is the biggest enemy of all. It's up to 300,000, blah, 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 blah.
single wealthy owner.
And this is something that, you know how I kind of got more aware for all the socialist stuff? 2 weeks ago, there was an interview in German TV where they walked around the city and they interviewed people. What do you think about the strike of the train workers, you know? And like 50% of people were like, oh, I don't like these strikes, they're very disruptive, they're not good. And I was like, oh, you fucking retarded, you muppets, man. And you see it here, man, it's what propaganda does to them. If people strike, which is their good right, look, let's make an example of Corona, man. In Corona, we saw that care workers are in massive, massive trouble. No one in chat can fucking deny that, right? Care workers are fucked. Now imagine all care workers will go on a 4-day strike. They will get shit on by society, man. How dare you let these old people and children and hospital people alone? How dare you do that? Oh no! And the headlines, man. Fucking Bild Zeitung headlines. Whoa, they're destroying Germany, even though it's their right. They get not paid enough, they're overworked. All society does is clap for them on a fucking balcony. That's how strong what he's talking about. Neoliberal propaganda has pushed into our brains that even these basic people trying to make their lives a bit better for working so hard every day, we will call them out for that on average.
And coverage
That's
from an
so
explicitly
fucked up.
socialist perspective. Notice how the story is framed. Patient safety, patient convenience, and the actual reason for the strike. By omitting certain details, or by giving precedence to one quote or fact over another, news outlets can frame a story in a way that nudges the reader.
If Joe Biden gets elected, he's going to be 85 when he leaves office, man.
towards a conclusion that benefits their operation, often beholden to obscenely rich individual owners or a particular flavor of economics. This is something I get asked about a lot. How do I help parents or friends break out of their little propaganda bubble? It's great to analyze an event like this, comparing coverage from different interest groups, but it's a lot of work, and none of us have time for that. That's why I always recommend people check out Ground News, because it has a ton of really useful tools to make building media literacy skills a lot easier.
Media literacy, whatever the fuck you just said. We just talked about this last week. A big German YouTuber talked about this in a latest video, and a good friend of mine. The number one most important thing right now will be to teach young people how to handle the media, right? There should be a course in school, how to do source research, how to read headlines, how to understand the media, how to understand what's going on there.
So
very, very sick video. Wow. This guy is, wow. I'm very impressed. What are you still doing here, mate? Jeez. Well, if you want to see more, click these videos. Have fun. Looking good, boy.